The snow began falling before dawn, not in angry gusts, but in the slow, quiet way that made everything seem softer than it was. It coated the dirt paths that led into Eden Ridge and buried the tracks from yesterday like they had never existed. In the center of town, the saloon door swung on its rusted hinges, creaking like an old memory that refused to die. Just beyond the town's edge, where the pines thickened and the land tilted toward the mountains, a woman walked with her head lowered and her arms clutched around herself. Her boots were thin, her coat thinner, but she walked like someone who refused to fall again. Her name was Cora Whitlock, 27, once the daughter of a respected cattleman, once the sweetheart of Eden Ridge, once the wife of a Union scout who never returned. But that was before the whispers, before the night someone saw her outside the Navajo encampment, before they dragged her before the council and branded her a traitor. They didn't burn her skin with iron, but what they did was worse. They took her name. They took her father's land. They buried her marriage license like it was a shameful mistake. And when the church bell tolled that Sunday morning, no one would meet her eyes, not even the preacher. Now she lived in a broken shack near the old mill, surviving off scraps and stubbornness. She had no family left. Her father had died bitter, her mother years before that. The town, too small and too proud, didn't forgive easily, and they feared what they didn't understand. Cora had been caught giving food to a wounded Navajo boy last winter. No one asked why. No one asked if he had spoken. They only saw the red beads she wore around her neck, a gift from his mother, a thank you she didn't even understand. They said she was sleeping with the enemy. They said she was passing secrets, though no one could say what secrets a widow in a dead town might hold. Still, it was enough. Enough for men to spit when she passed. Enough for women to clutch their children closer. Enough for the school to ask her not to come by again, even when she offered to teach for free. So she spent her days alone, grinding flour by hand, mending torn clothes for trade, boiling water from the stream to stay clean in a place that only saw dirt when it looked at her. One evening, as the last of the sunlight brushed gold against the snow, she stood outside the cabin with a bundle of kindling in her arms. That's when she saw him. A lone rider, approaching slow. His horse moved like it had come far. The rider wore a broad-brimmed hat pulled low, a scarf hiding half his face. He didn't speak, didn't lift a hand in greeting, but something about the way he sat, the way he dismounted, as if every motion was deliberate, it made her breath catch. He didn't come to her, not right away. He walked past, toward the edge of the pines where the smoke curled up from an old fire pit someone had once built for travelers. But he paused, turned, and from under that scarf, his eyes met hers. Cora tightened her grip on the kindling. The last man who had looked at her like that was her husband, and he died 3 winters ago, face down in snow that wouldn't melt. The stranger said nothing, but he nodded once, and that was more kindness than she'd known in months. She watched him light a fire with care, watch his hands move with calm, practiced grace. She wondered if he had a name, if he had a place to go, but she didn't ask, and he didn't offer. The snow kept falling. The sky turned from gold to iron, and for the first time in a long time, Cora didn't feel like the loneliest soul in Eden Ridge.
The next morning, Cora found him crouched by the fire pit again, stoking embers with a stick of pine. He had taken off the scarf, revealing a face roughened by sun and silence. His jaw was unshaven. His cheek bore a faint scar, one that seemed to cut through more than flesh. But it was his eyes that held her, not because they were kind, but because they didn't look away. She brought him bread, dry and hard, but warm. He accepted it with a nod, and for the first time he spoke. "You baked this?" She nodded, arms folded tight. "What's left of it. Oven gave out last winter." He chewed slowly, as if the act was less about hunger and more about understanding the woman before him. "Name's Elijah Kane," he said finally. She blinked, startled, not by the name, but by the offering of it. "Kara. Whitlock." He looked like he knew, or maybe he had heard. This was the kind of town where stories spread faster than prairie fire. They didn't talk much after that, but he stayed. Days passed. Snow deepened. The sky stayed gray. Elijah never asked to come inside, but sometimes Cora would find her woodpile stacked higher than she remembered, or the hole in her roof patched with tar and pine planks. Once a new bucket sat beside her well, the old one mended with wire. One afternoon she found him standing beneath a pine, watching her hang laundry on a frozen line. She turned, half expecting judgment. "Why are you still here?" she asked. He looked toward the ridge. "Waiting out a storm." But something in his voice told her the storm wasn't just in the sky. He came each evening now, sitting by the fire as she mended socks or stirred stew. Sometimes they spoke, more often they didn't, but the silence between them grew easier, like worn leather, familiar, forgiving. Cora caught herself watching him, the way he moved, the quiet way he listened. He never asked about the beads around her neck, never asked why the townspeople glared when he walked beside her toward the mill for trade, never asked why she never went beyond the old fence. But he saw it all, and still he stayed.
Trouble started the way it always did in small towns, with a whisper in the saloon. Someone saw Elijah leave her cabin one morning, said he was touching her arm, said they shared stew, said it like it was sin. By Sunday, the town council had met behind closed doors. By Monday, the store refused to trade her flour. The preacher didn't nod when she passed. Elijah noticed. One evening, he placed his coffee can on the fire and said, "They hate you worse now because of me." She didn't deny it, just stared at the flames. "You can leave," she said softly. "You don't owe me anything." He was quiet a long time, then, "Not leaving." Something in her cracked. "Why not?" Everyone else did. He looked at her then, eyes steady. "Because I know what it's like, to be hated for something you're not." She didn't ask, but she knew. Some ghost didn't need naming. One night they sat by the fire, and he reached into his coat, pulling out a hand-carved flute. The melody he played was soft, full of valleys and wind and years gone by. She closed her eyes and let it carry her to a place she'd forgotten, before the snow, before the shame, before the word traitor chased her name. When the music ended, she said, "Play that again." He smiled, just slightly. And then, as the firelight danced on their faces, Cora realized she wasn't waiting for someone to save her. He already had.
It happened in the hour before dawn, when the moonlight was weakest and the world still held its breath. Cora had just stoked the stove and was kneeling to ladle water into the kettle when a sharp knock rattled her door. Not a friendly tap, not the shuffle of Elijah's boots. This was the knock of lawmen, or worse, men who had made their own laws. She opened the door slowly. There were 3 of them, wrapped in dusters and hate. Sheriff Watts stood at the front, chewing tobacco with eyes that held no warmth. "Where is he?" the sheriff asked. Cora said nothing. One of the others stepped forward. "We saw him head this way yesterday. Kane, you're harboring him, girl?" Girl. It burned more than it should have. She stood straighter. "There's no one here but me." A pause. Then the sheriff sniffed the air. "Smells like coffee. Too strong for one." They pushed past her, searched her home, looked beneath the cot, kicked at the kettle, opened drawers like they had a right. Elijah wasn't there. Not yet, but they knew. They always did. Before they left, Watts turned. "Tell him to run. Next time we find him, we shoot. Doesn't matter what side he was on before." Then he spit on her floor. Cora waited by the fire that night, hands shaking as she tried to thread a needle that wouldn't catch. The storm outside had calmed, but a worse one sat in her chest. She thought of the last few weeks, of laughter without sound, of meals shared in silence, of a man who had never once touched her without asking, and yet had touched more of her soul than anyone before. And now they wanted to erase it. She didn't hear Elijah approach, but she knew he was there the moment her breath stilled. He entered slowly, saw her face, and stopped. "They came?" She nodded. "They know." His eyes hardened, not with fear, with knowing. "I should leave," he said. She wanted to scream no, but her lips wouldn't part. He crossed the room, took her hand gently. His thumb brushed the scar near her wrist, a mark left by rope when she had been dragged from town hall months ago. He didn't ask. He only pressed his palm against it, like his skin could erase the memory. Then he leaned down, kissed her forehead, and left. The next morning, Cora woke to silence. Not the silence of peace, the silence of something missing. She stepped outside, boots crunching in the frost. His fire was cold. His horse was gone. Only a trail of hoofprints led toward the ridge. On a tree nearby, someone had carved a mark. A circle split down the middle, a Navajo symbol. She didn't know its meaning, but she felt it in her bones. He had gone to protect her. That night, she sat by the fire alone, clutched the red beads at her neck. They felt heavier now, not just because of what they were, but because they were the only part of him she had left. She closed her eyes, and the memory came back. The flute song, the warmth of his coat when he placed it over her shoulders one windy night, the way he never looked away. And for the first time in years, Cora cried, not because she was afraid, but because something good had come and left.
For weeks, she heard nothing. The wind still brushed past the tent flaps, the frost still crept in during the night, and the embers still died too early in the hearth. But there were no more hoofbeats in the snow, no more soft footprints beyond the firelight. Elijah had vanished like a ghost after that night, when he dug her out and left without a word. She waited, and then waited some more. The village around her returned to its rhythm, distrustful eyes, cold mutterings, brief nods of tolerance. No one spoke of him again. It was as if he had never existed. Then one morning, just before dawn, she found a blanket, worn and dark, edged with Cheyenne thread, folded neatly on the rocks outside her tent. Beside it was a single hoofprint, facing away. Her fingers trembled as she touched the fabric. It smelled of earth and ash and something deep in her chest she couldn't name. Hope, maybe, or fear, or both, tangled and half-frozen. He was alive, and he had come back, not to her arms, but to the edge of her life, watching. That night she stayed up by the fire, listening, and when the flames sank into embers, she saw a shape move among the trees. He stood beneath the moonlight like he belonged to it, Elijah wrapped in silence, eyes glowing dimly from the shadows. He didn't speak, neither did she, but she felt his gaze cross the fire and find her. Then he turned and disappeared again into the dark. But the mountains had no patience for secrets. One of the hunters saw the footprints. A young boy found the blanket. And by the third day, whispers had become accusations. "She hides him," they muttered.
She brings savages into camp. She'll lead them back here." The headman didn't speak, but the women who shared her fire no longer looked her in the eye. The children were pulled away. The air shifted around her like a storm gathering weight. They didn't burn her tent, but they stacked dry brush beside it and waited. Far to the south, Elijah faced a fire of his own. They had seen him ride out at night, had followed the tracks, had found the white woman's trail and the horses she fed with stolen hay. "You choose her over us?" they asked, not in anger, but in a quiet sadness that cut deeper. One of the warriors, a man with half a jaw and 3 sons lost to cavalry bullets, stepped forward and spat near Elijah's feet. "She is not your people. She is the reason our mothers sleep with knives." Elijah didn't answer. He had no answer. But he didn't ride away either. For days he stood in silence beside the edge of camp. He sharpened his blade. He lit no fires. He slept with snow on his chest and listened to the wind. A test, perhaps, or penance. Then, on the 4th night, the elder came. He was old, older than the hills, they said, half blind and carved by winters, but his voice still carried. "You gave her your name," the elder said, sitting beside him. "Did she give yours?" Elijah nodded once. "And did she speak it with shame?" "No," he said. The elder turned his face to the wind. "Then go to her," he said, "but not in the dark, not like ghosts. If you would claim her, do so in the sun, and take what comes." Elijah looked down. "They will not let her live. Then die with her, or live loud enough to make them stop trying." That night, Korah stood alone in her tent, blanket clutched to her chest, fire low, heart quiet. She had not cried since the snowstorm, but now the tears came, slow, without sobs, without shame, like thawed rivers flowing at last. In the distance, a low whistle curled through the wind, and in the dark, a figure began to ride toward camp.
The storm returned the next night, not in snow or rain, but in the shape of torches and boots pounding through the sleeping valley. The townspeople, roused by fear and hate, followed the fresh trail of hoofs they had found near the ridge. They believed the Comanche had returned for vengeance, for blood, for what they imagined as tribal reckoning. But in the heart of it, Elijah stood still. He watched from the shadows as the angry mob approached the shack Korah had taken refuge in. She wasn't hiding anymore, not after what she knew, not after what he had whispered to her just before fading back into the night. "If they come for me, don't run. I won't let the world punish you for loving me." She stood outside the door, her body trembling but unyielding, arms shielding the small child swaddled in her shawl. The wind lifted her hair like a flame in the torchlight, and her voice cracked the silence. "She did nothing wrong," a voice shouted. "She lay with a savage. That's sin." "She gave birth to a child with Apache eyes," another man barked, finger pointing like a judge's gavel. "She loved," Elijah said, stepping into the circle of firelight. The crowd gasped. Guns lifted. Women pulled their children behind them. Horses neighed nervously. He was a silhouette at first, but as he approached, the fire revealed his face, weathered, strong, eyes like the desert at dusk. Elijah held no weapon, only his hands, bare and open. But there was power in that stance, the kind that says, "I face death, and I no longer flinch." "You want someone to blame?" he said, voice steady. "Take me." They hesitated. Then the pastor stepped forward, the same man who once held Korah's hand at her father's funeral. "She broke the law of God and country. She brought shame. She brought life," Elijah counted, and that life will outlive your laws and your hate. Someone fired. The bullet tore through the silence, grazing Elijah's shoulder. He didn't fall, didn't cry out. He simply looked at the shooter, young, scared, barely a man, and nodded. That all you got? Cora screamed, but Elijah held up his hand. Don't, Cora. Let him see. A pause, a breath held by all. Then an elder woman, Hattie, the midwife, stepped between Elijah and the men. Her voice, brittle but fierce, cracked like thunder. You boys come here talking sin? You ever delivered a baby in blood and snow with your bare hands? You ever watched a woman die bringing light into this world? No one answered. She lived, Hattie said, turning to the crowd, because he guarded her. Not because he was white or red or anything in between, but because he was good. One by one, the guns lowered. But hatred dies slow. The mayor, red with rage, spat on the ground. If you want to live with him, Cora, you'll never set foot in this town again. She looked at the faces, some ashamed, others unmoved, then down at her son, then at Elijah. I already left, she whispered. That night they rode, not in hiding, not in shame, but forward, toward the land where the Comanche elder had promised them sanctuary if Elijah would stand for both. And he did. They built a home from driftwood and stone near the canyon's edge, where wildflowers grew even in hard soil. Cora learned the language of the land, Elijah, the rhythm of lullabies. The child grew up between two fires, one of blood, one of love, and bore both with quiet pride. Years later, they returned, not to the town, but to its edge, where the grave of Cora's mother rested. They brought flowers, a carving stone, and silence. The wind was kinder then, or maybe it just seemed so because no one was chasing him anymore. Love had already won. And in the arms of a once hated warrior, Cora found not just a life, but a reason to forgive the world that tried to bury her.